Welcome to the Justin Strawn Podcast. I am your host, Justin Strawn. Glad to be back with you guys recording on a Tuesday morning. Got a lot to talk about today. If you're a Mississippi State fan, we are going to be looking back at the Mayo Bowl. So we'll be looking back at that here in just a little bit. We will also be looking at the Mississippi State basketball team and how they performed this past weekend and talk about that as well. Plus, on the entertainment side, we will be discussing my top 10 TV shows of 2025. Now that 2025 has come and gone, we'll be discussing all of that as we start the show. Just a reminder, if you are listening on a podcast app of some sort, if you're listening out there on YouTube, not YouTube, if you're listening on podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever it may be, if you can do me a favor and just hit the follow button, the subscribe button, whatever it is that your podcast catcher of choice uses, that would be great. And if you can also write me a little review on Apple Podcasts if you're using it, that would help me out a lot as well. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that little subscribe button because I do get quite a bit of viewers on YouTube. So if you can do me a favor and just hit the subscribe button as well, that would help a lot as well. So we're growing a lot on all of those platforms. It would really help me out a lot. I'm on TikTok as I record live every single time that I do a podcast. So if you're on TikTok, you can follow me there. And also on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all those places. So like I said, it would help me out a lot if you could like and subscribe and do all other fun stuff on all of those platforms. All right, let's go ahead and get into the heart of the show. Like I said, we are discussing the fallout of the Mayo Bowl. And let's just be real honest, guys. We didn't really learn much from the Mayo Bowl. The Duke's Mayo Bowl was, as I said on Friday morning when I recorded, I thought the Duke's Mayo Bowl was an opportunity for Jeff Levy to get people like me, people who are not completely on board with what he has done so far. It was an opportunity for him to possibly move the needle a little bit more in his favor with a lot of the Mississippi State fans who are like me and aren't just completely on board with everything that he's doing. And unfortunately, he didn't do that. And let's just be honest at this point. If you listen to Thunder and Lightning on Monday morning, I agree with a lot of what Brian was saying. They didn't do things that are true because basically, if you don't fix the offensive line, it doesn't matter. I mean, changing out Blake Shapen for Kamario Taylor was a big step in the right direction. I firmly believe that. And I also think that if Blake Shapen had been the quarterback during the Mayo Bowl, then Mississippi State would have probably lost even worse because there was a number of times in the Mayo Bowl that Kamario Taylor escaped and made things happen. But the problem that we have right now as Mississippi State football fans, until you can get an offensive line that can block, it's not going to matter who you put back there. It's not going to get significantly better. We could put Patrick Mahomes back there and it would not get significantly better because you got to have somebody who can block. I mean, Kamario Taylor does a decent amount of things just on his own and kind of taking the playbook and just doing whatever he has to ad lib. He just does a really good job with that. But the problem is you can't have your quarterback running for his life on every single play because he was getting killed just like Blake Shapen was. The difference was he was able to actually, get a few yards at a time by trying to run the football as well as sitting back in the pocket. So like there is a difference in what he and Blake Shapen were doing, but they both still end up getting killed in the process. It's just a very different form. You have a chance when you have Kamario Taylor, whereas you didn't have a chance when you had Blake Shapen because he just wasn't mobile enough. And the problem that we have here with Kamario Taylor is if he is going to be mobile and he is going to escape the pressure, you can very easily end up with a situation like you had on Friday night where he ends up putting himself in danger of getting seriously injured. We thought we might have lost him for, well into the 2026 season with the way that the final play that he ran on Friday night ended up going. And you can talk all you want about whether or not he should have been in there or whatever. I get all that, but regardless, he's the quarterback, and if he's going to be on the field, he's going to do everything he can to try to make the play. It doesn't matter what the score is because he's a competitor, and that's what he does. So until you get an offensive line, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what we do as a football team because your quarterback cannot run for his life every single play. Your running backs have no holes that they can find within the offensive line with the way that it currently is constructed. And as much as I gave credit to Jeff Levy for making the step to get rid of the defensive coordinator and making that change, well, I thought that was an excellent sign of growth. He has done nothing with the offensive line coach. Coach Lodeholt, he deserves to be held accountable just as much as the defensive coordinator deserves to be held accountable. And I don't know why we, at this point, have not made a move with the offensive line coach. Well, I know why it is. The reason why they haven't made a move with the offensive line coach is it's the same thing that we had with the defensive coordinator. He's the buddy. Coach Lodeholt is the buddy of Jeff Levy. He got him the job, and he wants to keep him on staff because that is his bud. That's his guy. And this is how he constructed most of his coaching staff. He got the guys who were his friends and his buds, and he brought them on staff. And unfortunately, some of them just can't coach. This offensive line was the worst that I have seen in all of my years of watching Mississippi State football. This year's and last year's have been pathetic. And the fact that he doesn't hold them accountable for how badly their units have played just continues to be concerning with Jeff Levy. I mean, the guy's not even 40 years old, and this is the type of stuff that makes me worry that this guy is just not ready to be a head coach. And he should be able to look at his offensive line. And look, is there talent issues? Yes, there is. But you're supposed to be, if you're going to be a coach and if you're going to be the head coach, you have to look at your team and you have to understand that you ultimately are the ones, you're ultimately the one responsible. And if your offensive line coach isn't getting the job done and getting your offensive line prepared, at least give you a chance in the SEC, then you have to make a move. And if you can't, the athletic director is going to eventually make a move on you because that's where we're at with Jeff Levy and his program. He refuses to make a move with his offensive line, and he knows. I mean, he has said that it's a problem and that they're not where they need to be in that room. He knows this, but he refuses to put any accountability on the coach of that unit. He just puts the accountability on the players, and players deserve accountability for it. They do. But the coach is the one who's ultimately responsible for the performance of that group. If the coach isn't getting anything out of those players, if he's not getting more, if we can't even protect him for more than 2 seconds before he has to run for his life, you've got to make a change there. And that's just the way it's going to be. Like I said, it doesn't matter who we put back at quarterback. It's not going to make a difference if we can't give them any type of protection at all, because that's basically what it's been like so far with Jeff Levy and this offensive line in these 2 years. And I would love to see the Jeff Levy offense with a decent offensive line. I would love to see what that looks like. I would love to see what Kamario Taylor and company can do if they have a little bit of time that they can actually throw the football, if they can establish a running game because their offensive line is providing holes for the running backs to run through. I would love to see that. And I know there are a lot of people, whenever I put something on TikTok, put something on Twitter about how Jeff Levy just doesn't appear to be the guy at this point. Almost every single time that I see somebody, I'd put something up there in line with what I just said about him not being the guy potentially, somebody will say, well, you got to give him time. Guys, if you're still you have to give him time frame in mind. If that is the way you approach college football nowadays, you get left behind. That's just the way it works in the college football world. You don't have time anymore. There's no room for patience anymore. That boat has sailed. If you're still in the give him time, you have to be patient. That boat has sailed. It's not 2005 anymore. We're in a very different era of college football, and we've got to start changing our expectations in the way we think about college football. And time is not something that you can give a coach. You might give him a year to get things kind of back in shape, back in line, but you don't get anything more than that. And if we are in year 3 and we're still doing, 5-7, 3-9 or something like that, it's time to move on. You don't have the time that you once did. In the NIL era, the portal era of college football is here. And whether you like it or not, and I know a lot of Mississippi State fans don't like it because those are the bunch of us who had the mindset of, a college scholarship is all they need. That's the only compensation that they should have to, that should be more than enough for a college football player. If that is your mindset and that is your mentality, then you just need to give up on college athletics because those days are gone. They're not coming back. It's basically a professional sport at this point. And we have to understand that going forward. The days of, oh, you just play for love of school and all that kind of stuff, those days are gone. They're not coming back. And we've just got to move on from that mindset and that mentality. Because if you don't, then the world of college athletics is going to leave you behind and leave you in the dust. That's just the way that it's going to be. And we have to understand that. And I'm afraid a lot of Mississippi State fans just don't. So, look, NIL is much better than it used to be for Mississippi State. When John Cohen was the athletic director, it was in a really bad shape. It was not in a good place. Zach Sheldon has gotten it there. And it's going to be up to Jeff Levy to use the funds that he has to get his offensive line corrected. And the other issue, and the thing that I don't think has been discussed enough, the defensive line has to be fixed as well. And that's got to be changed as well, because as much as we talk about the offensive line and how badly it played and how much it put Kamario Taylor in jeopardy on Friday night, the defensive line wasn't doing anything to get any pressure on Robbie Ashford at all on Friday night. We've got to get that straightened out as well. It's amazing that probably the two areas of a football team that just cannot afford to be absolutely awful, your offensive line and your defensive line, those are by far the two areas where Mississippi State struggles the most. You can't afford to be bad in those areas on a football team. You just can't. And Mississippi State is absolutely garbage when it comes to those two areas of a football team. They're pathetically bad when it comes to offensive line and defensive line. The Wake Forest, look, I will say this, they did a pretty decent job in the first half of kind of keeping things in check, but so often is the case, eventually they get worn down, and by the time that the game is over, you've surrendered 43 points. Now, I know 8 of those points came via special teams, but you've surrendered 43 points by the time you get to the end of the ball game, and it's just another instance of a team being, at some point, they're going to be able to do whatever they want against the Mississippi State defense, and they've got to get that fixed. Now, I do have a lot of faith in Zach Arnett to get some of this fixed, and even with the same players, I think he'll be able to do a better job of correcting these mistakes, but it's not going to be instantaneous. It's not going to be, if he has to use the players that he currently has, you're at best hoping to get into like the top 75. I was hoping this defense could be a top 50 defense, but as of right now, that's just not the case. Look, we need to start seeing if you're a Mississippi State fan, you want to start seeing some action taking place in the portal. And there are the insiders saying that they should eventually start seeing that. But the only thing that I have seen is a receiver from Missouri has committed to Mississippi State, a former 4-star, which is good. It's great that you're getting more talent, especially at the receiver position, which is vitally important to a Jeff Levy offense. But it's not the area that you really need to correct the most. And like I said, the offensive line, the defensive line, we haven't seen that at this point, and it's concerning that there hasn't been a whole lot of movement in regards to those two areas. My other concern is the hardest part of a football team to build through the portal is offensive line and defensive line, because those two units have to work together and have to kind of understand everybody else's role on the team more so than any other unit. Wide receivers can run their own routes. They don't have to be as concerned with what the other receivers are doing. They do a little bit. I'm not going to say it's completely out there. They don't have to worry about the other receivers at all, but it's not as much as the offensive line does. Same thing with running backs. Typically, there's only, in today's game of football, there's typically only one running back on the field at a time. But the offensive line, they have to work together as a unit. And if you're bringing in basically a whole new offensive line, which is what Mississippi State is probably going to have to do, it's hard to get that cohesion and gel together. So they're in a bad spot. I mean, it's just the reality of the situation. You haven't had a good offensive line the first 2 years of the Jeff Levy, and if you have to completely rebuild it again in year 3, it's going to be harder. Now, better talent will help, but are they going to have the time to gel, to play as a unit, and to understand the way what each other does on that line? I don't know. We'll have to kind of see. But look, I don't have high hopes for year 3. I'm hoping that they can get to 7 wins. That's my hope. But I don't have a whole lot of hopes that he will actually do it. And I'm afraid that in 2026, we're going to be looking for another coach. Now, hopefully, you don't have the same issue that you had last year, where you have all of these programs who are jettisoning their coach. And if that ends up being the case, you better hope that Florida State rebounds with Mike Norvell, because if they don't, they're going to get rid of him. There's some other programs out there. Baylor's probably going to be looking for a coach, but you can compete with Baylor, but there's going to be some other programs out there that are going to be looking for head coaches. But You just hope and pray that's not like it was when you have LSU, you have Florida, you have Auburn, you have all these other big jobs open up, and you have to compete for coaches with those programs as well. We'll have to wait and see on that, but it's concerning to say the least. All right, let's talk about the basketball teams. We finally got some good news. Finally got some good news on Saturday with the basketball team. Mississippi State's basketball team ends up winning in overtime on the road against the Texas Longhorns. A big win for the Bulldogs. One, because it pulls them into the top 100 in the NCAA net rankings. If you can continue to win and continue to build your program from that win, then you got a chance to make the NCAA tournament. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be very difficult. They've got a long road to climb. They have a long road to travel to get to the NCAA tournament, but it's doable. But you're going to have to win a lot of games like you won on Saturday night against Texas. Look, Texas is a good, not great team. That loss to Mississippi State dropped them down to like 71 in the net rankings. But because it was on the road, as long as they stay in either the top 75 or top 80, that's a quad one win for Mississippi State. You're going to need more of that. The issue that Mississippi State has, and I've talked about this before, is you got to get some consistent play from other people besides Josh Hubbard and Jaden Epps. Josh Hubbard and Jaden Epps had an amazing ball game. Josh Hubbard ends up scoring 38 points, a career high. Now, he did take a lot of shots, but at this point, that's just kind of what you have to have. You just have to have him shooting a whole bunch of shots. And you hope and pray that he's hitting more of them than he's not hitting. And that's just the way it is with him. Jaden Epps had another great game as well. I think he scored 25 points or something like that. And that's just what you have to get from those two guys. Those two guys have to be the bulk of your scoring. What they did get, and hopefully this was kind of the second game in a row that we got a good game from Achor. Achor had a really solid game against Texas on Saturday night. He went for 10 points, 13 rebounds. He should be a double-double machine. He just should be. I mean, you don't need him to score 18, 20 points a game. You don't need that from Achor, but you need him scoring 8 to 12 a game. You need him getting 8 to 12 rebounds a game. That's what you need from Achor. And they moved him to the bench on Saturday, and they brought him off the bench. Maybe that will help him. Maybe just coming in off the bench will allow him to kind of understand where the game is, get the game flow a little bit better in his mind before he starts to really contribute. I don't know, but they need more of that, and they just need somebody to be that third option on a consistent basis. Because the problem is they've had third options, but it's been somebody different every single time that they have taken the court. Sometimes it's been Jabari McGee. Sometimes it's been Achor. Sometimes it's been Quincy Ballard. Sometimes it's been Mancura, or however you pronounce the guy's name. Like I said, we haven't had a whole lot of consistencies. These last two games, though, Achor has played pretty well. And it's what you were pretty much expecting from Achor to begin with. So if he can continue to do that, then you got a chance with this Mississippi State basketball team. I mentioned this a while back. I've started to wonder when Mississippi State was struggling so badly, has the game passed Chris Jans by? And I don't think that it has, but I do think that the way the game of college basketball works today is more difficult for a Chris Jans type of coach. A Chris Jans type of coach is a grinder. He is a guy that needs you to buy in to everything that he says. And if you don't, it's going to be hard for you and you're not going to be happy. This is one of the reasons why a lot of our transfer portal players have missed in the past few years. And it was a concern coming into this year because you were relying so heavily on the transfer portal. And we were starting to see some of those reasons for those concerns earlier in the season. But the Chris Jans way of basketball means you have to commit defensively. You have to put 100% effort out every single minute that you're out on the floor. You don't have time to lollygag. You don't have time to showboat. You don't have any of that stuff for you with a Chris Jans type of style. And that's not always going to translate really well to begin with, especially when you have a bunch of new players on a team. One thing that Chris Jans needs to do is, and it's hard because, like I said, playing for a Chris Jans type coach is a difficult thing. You've got to get some consistency. You've got to get some guys that stick around for a few years. And that's been the biggest issue that Mississippi State has had thus far this year, is they didn't bring a whole lot of guys back, and they're still all trying to figure out their roles. We're closer to it, and maybe that will help us going further. This game tomorrow against Oklahoma is huge because it's a good team. It's not a great team. They're, I think, like in the 50s in the net rankings, and because it's at home, this would be a quad 2 opportunity. But you have an opportunity to have another good win against a good team, not a great team, but a good team. And then you've got to go on the road to Kentucky. And again, Kentucky hasn't been great this year, but it's still Kentucky. There's still a lot of name recognition and name prestige when it comes to Kentucky when you see that. And when you go on the road, they're still going to have a packed house. They're still going to have a ton of people in the stands because of the fact that it is Kentucky basketball. So, like I said, you really need to try to figure out a way to get to 3 wins because unfortunately, Nate Oates and Alabama come to the hump the following week, and State has yet to beat him. And, uh, they don't appear to be quite as good as they have been in years past, but they're still really good. And it's going to be hard for Mississippi State to find a win against that team. So I'm hoping and praying that they get off to a good start because it's going to be tough. But look, this team, I really felt like this team has been talented. They just haven't figured out how to play together. And I think we're seeing that. It was a great win because one of the things I loved about that win on Saturday night, they did the thing that Mississippi State almost never does. They led for most of the game. They give up the lead late. They fall behind by 7 points with less than 2 minutes to play. And at that point, normally it's done. It's over. Mississippi State's done. They're not going to win that game. But they showed some grit. They showed some toughness. And they end up taking the game to overtime after trailing by 7 points with less than 2 minutes left and end up winning the game. Now, they kind of took control in overtime. And again, they gave up the lead. But again, they showed some toughness. They showed some grit. And they pulled that victory out. So that's what you need from this Mississippi State team. Look, it's only one game. It doesn't mean that that's what they're going to continue to do for the rest of the SEC season, but it is a start, and it's what you need to see. They have been playing well for the past 6 or 7 games, and maybe those early season struggles they've begun to put them behind them at this point. So that's kind of what you're hoping for, and we'll just see if that ends up being the case. On the women's side, one of the things I talked about earlier when I talked about the women, I didn't really know what to make of them simply because they were playing such poor competition. They had one of the worst strength of schedules in all of women's college basketball. They were off to a great start. They were off to a 13-1 start, looked really good. Then they played Auburn. I was like, okay, things look really good there. I think they won by like 23 points against Auburn. So that looked good. You're like, okay, they played an SEC team. They ended up killing them. This is great. This is good. Well, this past Sunday, Mississippi State goes on the road to Oklahoma. The number 18 team and the number 8 team in the nation. I'm going to get that right eventually. The number 8 team in the nation. They go on the road and they lose by 48 points. Yeah, 48 points. They lost 95-47. And that was my concern going into the women's basketball season is their strength of schedule. The results of their record has more to do with their strength of schedule than it does with the quality of the Mississippi State women's basketball team. Look, again, it's only one game. It could have just been the result of a really bad game against a really good opponent. But you never want to see your team lose by nearly 50 points. They got doubled up. I mean, that's just the truth of the matter. They got doubled up by Oklahoma. And if Sam Purcell wants to continue to do some of the positive things that he's done for this team, he's got to challenge his team more in the non-conference schedule. I'm all about trying to give your team some confidence. There are games that you can schedule to give your team some confidence, but I really truly believe the only thing that he did was give them a false sense of security about who they really were. And once they get challenged a little bit by a really good Oklahoma team, it ends up just kind of falling apart on them. They can't go 500 in SEC play and make the SEC tournament. Normally, if you're around 500 in SEC play in women's college basketball, you'll make the NCAA tournament. And this team won't. Their strength of schedule in the non-conference just isn't going to be good enough. The committee will look at that and they'll say they didn't challenge themselves at all outside of SEC play. Why should we reward this team with a NCAA tournament berth when they did nothing to challenge themselves outside of SEC play? It won't work. And like I said, you're banking, if you schedule the way that Mississippi State scheduled in the non-conference portion of the season, you're banking on that team being able to win, 11, 12 games in SEC play, because that's the only way that they're going to make the NCAA tournament. It doesn't matter how many games you win against really bad competition, because there's not a single good win on Mississippi State's resume that's going to be outside of SEC play. There's just not. That's an issue. They're going to have to figure that part of it out. Like I said, I like Sam Purcell. I think he's done a lot of really good things. I think he's had an uphill battle to climb, but for the most part, I think he's done a good job. But they've got to do better when it comes to the non-conference portion of the schedule. They just do. All right, let's talk about something I've enjoyed a little bit more. Let's talk about our top 10 television shows from the previous year. 2025 is in the books. We are now on to 2026, and we're moving on. We're looking back, though, at what I thought were the 10 best shows in television in 2025. The one thing I do think was interesting about this past year in television, I thought it was a year where a lot of shows that had kind of established themselves and shows that people were really excited about, I think they kind of disappointed because I looked at my list and that's kind of the case it was for a number of the shows that are going to be on here. There's going to be a number of new shows that debuted for the first time, and there's going to be a number of shows that a lot of people had high expectations for that aren't on my list. So, like I said, and there's some shows that did have their second, third, fourth season that aren't quite as high as they normally would be. So, like I said, I think it was a pretty good year in television. But I say that, and when I did the podcast that I did with Ryan Nelson on the Main Attraction podcast, whenever we talked about our year in review of television, we would often say, it was a good year in TV. But the problem is, because of all the streaming services, because of all the options that are out there, we talk about the good stuff, but there's a lot of bad stuff as well. And there was a lot of bad stuff this year on television as well, but there was plenty of good to go along with it. So, all right, number 10 for me is Paradise. This is a show that I did not catch when it first came out. I watched the first episode and I never got around to watching it again until much later on in the year. Paradise does something really interesting. They give you a big, huge twist in the first episode, and then they just play on that twist for the rest of the season. And it's a really fun show. The show is about the president of the United States getting murdered at the very beginning. That's literally what happens at the very start, and it's how the show is marketed. So him getting killed is not the twist. He gets killed, and you think it's going to just be a simple murder mystery into who killed the president. But then at the very end of the first episode of the season, you get this big, huge twist that they show, and it just plays off that twist for the remainder of the show. It's a really good show. I really enjoyed it. It's surprising that it works as really well as it did, because when I first saw that twist, I was like, I don't know about this. I'm not sure that this is going to work out that well, but it did, and I liked it. I was really kind of surprised by it. Next is The Beast in Me. It was on Netflix. It was a solid outing at Claire Danes, and I cannot remember the guy who played her opposite in it, but nevertheless, it was a fun show, the type of show that Claire Danes does really, really well. It's a little bit like indulgent in the type of show that it is. Like, it's not necessarily, prestige drama television, but it's still just a really fun show to watch. Like I said, Claire Danes has done this type of role, and she has excelled at this type of role throughout the course of her career. And it was another show that I just really enjoyed a lot. I thought it was fantastic. And it comes in at number 9 for me on my rankings of the top 10 shows. Number 8 is Poker Face. I really enjoyed Poker Face this season. I didn't enjoy it quite as much as I did the first season. This is kind of what I was talking about earlier. This is a show that I did like. I thought was a whole lot of fun. But the first season of Poker Face was like number 2 or number 3 when we did our year in review that year. This year, it comes in at number 8. It's still a really good show, still fun. I'm really looking forward to season 3. I really enjoy a lot of things that Ryan Johnson does. Natasha Lyonne is just absolutely perfect in the role of Charlie. She is basically doing her best Peter Falk as Columbo throughout the course of that show. It's a fun, entertaining show. I enjoy it a lot. But this season wasn't quite as good as the first season, and that's okay. You can not be quite as good, but as long as you're still a good quality show, that's all that ultimately matters. And I'll be very interested to see what they do in the third season, as they kind of are reverting back to what they were doing in the first season. At least that's what the way that it appears it's going to be once we get to season 3. Number 7 for me. This is a new show, Murderbot. If you didn't catch Murderbot on Apple TV, and Apple TV is doing some really great stuff in terms of sci-fi. I've really liked a lot of their sci-fi offerings, but one of their best shows this year was Murderbot. It came out in the summer, and maybe end of spring into early summer. I don't remember exactly when it came out, but it was debuting week to week, and it was just a really fantastic show. Really interesting a concept where basically you have this intergalactic society, and they have these bots that are powered by like people they create. It's a really weird thing to kind of try to sit there and describe to people, but it's a fun show. Really enjoyed it a lot. I'll be very interested to see what they do for our second season because I'm pretty certain that they're getting a season 2. But Murderbot was really just one of the big hits for this year and one that just took me by surprise. I was not expect. I thought it would be good because most of the things that I see on Apple TV typically are pretty good, but I wasn't expecting this to be as good as it was. It was just a really fantastic show. Number 6, and again, another show that was a little disappointing, Severance. I liked Severance this year. I thought it was really good. It just didn't quite live up to season 1. And to be honest, though, living up to season 1 was always going to be tough. Severance is one of those shows that had such an amazing premiere season that getting back to the same type of enjoyment, the same type of quality that we got with that first season was always going to be a difficult thing to ask of the television show. But I thought they did a pretty good job of coming at least kind of close to getting back to that level. But I really enjoyed Severance season 2. There was only one episode that just did not do it for me. I think it was episode 7. But for the most part, I thought they did everything just really well. The finale obviously was one thing that we were all looking forward to because that season 1 finale was just so incredible. And it's one of the best season finales I think I've ever seen. I didn't think they would match up to the hype of that one, and I don't think they did, but they came a lot closer than I thought they would. The finale for season 2 was still really good. They still did a lot of interesting things in the finale, even though it might not be quite as the same level as season 1's finale. The one thing I do like about what the show has done in both seasons is they have said, basically, we're going to leave it at a point where you don't know how this show can go forward, and we're still going to go forward anyway with another season after this. And they did that with season 2, just like they did in season 1. I don't know where they go from this point on with the way they let that show at the end of season 2. I have no idea. But they did the same thing in season 1, and they still made a really good show in season 2. So I'll be very interested to see how all that plays out once we get to the third season of Severance. Number 5, The Rehearsal. This was just amazing. Nathan Fielder just put on an absolute stunner of a television show in this season. I'm still shocked at some of the things he put on television. And look, it's not like it's graphic or anything like that. It's just the things that he did and his concepts for what he put on television. There are still things about that show that I just cannot comprehend that he was able to do and make it make sense. If I were to tell you that the goal of season 2, what he is actually planning to do throughout the course of that show, is to create higher safety levels in air traffic transportation by opening the lines of communication between the pilot and co-pilot. And then you see the TV show, you won't. If I were to try to explain the TV show after giving you that premise, you wouldn't believe it. It's one of those things you just have to watch and you just have to see. If you haven't seen The Rehearsal, you need to go check it out. It's very different than the first season. The first season was completely one thing. This season is completely another. It was really just an amazing show. I came to that show every week just completely surprised at everything that I saw every single week. It was just absolutely astounding. Number 4, Stranger Things. Look, this is my favorite show of all time, but this was the weakest season. It's always hard to do the final season of a show like Stranger Things, but I still thought it was really good. I loved the finale. The finale was great. I thought the first 4 episodes were really good. It was that second volume, episodes 5, 6, and 7, I thought that were the weakest points of the season, but I thought it was still really good. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I thought it ended really just perfectly, to be perfectly honest with you. So as many problems that people have pointed out, as many issues that people have tried to point out on the television show, I thought that this final season was really good. Like I said, I think it's the weakest season, but I still thought it was really good. Number 3 for me is Pluribus. We've been talking about Pluribus the last couple of weeks on the podcast. This show was a surprise. This was one I didn't even know was coming out until about 2 weeks before it actually aired on Apple TV. It's a great show because it's sci-fi, but it's very accessible sci-fi. If you're not into like spaceships and aliens or things like that, it has aliens, but they're all in the form of humans that are just, and there's this mind virus. So like I said, it's very accessible. It doesn't look like a sci-fi show, even though it is. So it's a very accessible show. I think it has some really good performances. They do some really interesting things. They ask some really interesting questions about humanity and how we should get along with each other and what, the idea of community versus the self and all this type of stuff like that. There's a lot of interesting things that they're doing in that show, and I just really enjoyed it quite a bit. Number 2 for me is Task. I talked about this a little bit as this podcast was getting started. I love Task. Task was one of the best shows of the year. I'm so happy that they're getting a second season. I thought it was going to just be a limited show, but they have gone ahead and greenlit for a second season as well. Really excited about getting this second season. It'll probably be a couple of years away, but the first season was just absolutely fantastic. Mark Ruffalo was great. The entire cast was great of this show. I'll be very interested to see what they do for a second season, if they stick with Mark Ruffalo and try to just bring in a new task force, or if we're going someplace completely different and with a whole brand new cast of characters. I don't know, but the first season was just top notch. Great performances, incredible writing. Like I said, just loved everything they did in Task. It was not a show that I had that was really on my radar at all coming into 2025, and the fact that it ends up as number 2 on my list says a lot just about how good this show really was. And number 1 for me is Andor. The first season of Andor was a tour de force. The second season of Andor was also a tour de force. My only issue I hated with Andor is I understand why they did it. They did 3 episodes at a time, but basically they were asking you to watch a 2.5-hour movie every single week. And I just didn't have a whole lot of time for that. So I wasn't able to keep up with the show while it was going on. I ended up catching it about a month after it actually aired. But once I did, it lived up to all the hype that the first season created. It is absolutely the best version of Star Wars. If you have not seen Andor, you need to go check it out. If you've always said Star Wars is for kids and therefore you don't want anything to do with it, you need to watch Andor, because Andor is not a child's television show. It is asking a lot of difficult questions about fascism. It is asking a lot of difficult questions about rebellion and what stakes people are willing to put on the line in terms of rebelling against the fascist state. Like I said, it gives a ton of context to the things that they talk about in the Star Wars movies and in the other Star Wars television shows. It gives a lot more context and does a lot more in terms of giving us an idea of what life was actually like for the people in the Galactic Empire while the Emperor and Darth Vader were in control. We don't see Force users. We do see one Force user, I will say that, but they're not a Jedi, and they're not like flashing lightsabers or doing anything like that. It's a very different type of Star Wars experience, and if you haven't watched it, I highly recommend checking it out. Like I said, it is by far, to me, the best version of a Star Wars show is, and if you haven't checked it out, I would highly recommend checking it out. It is just absolutely phenomenal. The writing, the performances, they're all as good as you can get, and it all comes in a Star Wars television show. So, all right, guys. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up there. I appreciate you guys tuning in. And as always, until next time. Oh, by the way, we'll be talking about, to do this before I do all that. The next show will either be Thursday or Friday. We'll be looking back at the Oklahoma game for Mississippi State. We'll look at what took place then. We'll probably also look ahead to the college football playoff and if it's Thursday, we'll look ahead to the college football playoff. If it's Friday, we'll look back at the Ole Miss and Miami game and look ahead to the Oregon and Indiana game. But we'll also take a look at the top 10 movies for 2025. Appreciate you guys tuning in. And as always, until next time, we'll talk to you then.